Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today I have the pleasure of Sarah Jane Black. Good morning to you, Sarah Jane.
Good morning, Julian. Good
Good to
morning.
see you. You are an award-winning business improvement specialist and the founder and owner of SB Business Support, where you support and deliver solutions for businesses and sole traders on compliance, accreditation and training. And today we're going to be exploring hybrid and flexible working, some of the issues that conjures up, and some of the ways that we can help organisation move to that or embrace it, and also help them facilitate it in a real positive way. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we get into that conversation, Sarah Jane, I'd like to ask you, what do you love about what you do?
I love what I do because it makes a difference to people. And ultimately, everything I do results in a safer environment for all. So, whether that's training, whether that's compliance, whether it's accreditation, health and safety, whatever it is, it encompasses a safe working environment for everybody.
That's fantastic. And you've been doing this for a number of years, haven't you, in terms of what you do?
My consultancy on and off for about 17 years. Oh, yeah, long time.
That's fantastic. And we're talking hybrid working, flexible working, which we know has been its birth even more so in the last 3 years since the pandemic. I know it's flexible working has always been there. It's just not been embraced, and we were forced to embrace it. And I'd just like you to get your experience, your observations of hybrid working and flexible working you've noticed over the last number of years, and just see what your thinking have been on it from that observation.
Well, I think we can all talk from experience. I certainly can talk from personal experience of the hybrid model. That's going from, there's two different sorts of models when you come to talking about hybrid, and we probably talk about those a little bit later. But for personal experience, I've gone from being in an office with people and then total isolation at home alone. And the wall doesn't talk back. So it can be isolating in that you miss the people, you miss the collaboration, you miss an opinion. And that in itself becomes hard. And then obviously we've gone from being forced upon, everything forced upon us, and we've gone onto the Zoom world and the Teams world and the virtual world of, not just walking around chatting to our friends on mobiles. We're now having corporate meetings online, and they have made the working world adaptable, far more flexible, but there are some major drawbacks with the whole hybrid model.
And I'd like to explore that, because I think often people talk about all the positives, and there is a lot of positives. We know that, but I'd like to just look at the drawbacks, negatives, and then what they are, but also how can we help mitigate some of those, because obviously it's all very well being pointing out the problem, but how can we then help solve that with potential listeners who now probably, most people are choosing to be hybrid, flexible, there's a whole mixture of stuff going on right now, and there is some negatives for it. So that would just be good for you to explore that a little bit, Sarah Jane.
Yeah, definitely. It is quite highly controversial now, and it seems to be top trend on most people's list of to-dos or to be aware of and to talk about. It has forced a massive change and a massive gap in gender equality, and I think that's probably the biggest challenge out there. And from my own opinion, quite sad, because we've spent so many years trying to reduce that gender gap, that quality gap, and subsequently hybrid working has made a bit of a difference there. It's doubly hard for a woman in a hybrid working space, and that will be determinant on the type of hybrid working model you'll use. There are two. There's a fixed hybrid model and a flexible hybrid model. And the flexible hybrid model is where employees are sometimes co-located, whereas the fixed model is you're always located, so you're always at home. The solution is to have in life a little bit of everything, so a mix. But where we've got the problem with the equality side of it is, as I said, the fixed hybrid model. And it's actually, the percentage out there is 79% of men against just 37% of women have said that there's a positive experience from working in the hybrid model. I mean,
what's the underlying issues with that? Why are issues caused through gender? What's the driver of that?
We've got 52.7% of the workers in the UK are in fact women anyway. So you've got that statistic to consider overall. But what actually happens is there's more chance of a toddler coming in and doing a cameo on a woman's Zoom meeting than there is a gentleman's. More often than not, women, when they've got their 5 minutes away from their screen, because they're, you're thinking of the health and safety of your display equipment, you come away, and most men will just come away and sit and probably read something, but a woman will go and put a wash on, or they'll be scheduling their parents in for a doctor's appointment or something like that. So it is absolutely, it's been studied that women will continue to do the scheduling of families, the scheduling of the children to and from school. They'll do the washing. They'll also be expected to still make the dinners. And that has been exclusively known that actually the equality gap has got bigger because of it. So hence you get more women who want to actually work in the hybrid setting because it's easier for children, but you'll find that more women get burnt out because they are doing the home and work life all wrapped up in one.
Yeah, because I'd see that the whole flexible working, and that's not should we assume that the woman is always the main carer, but at the moment it tends to be the main carer. In some cases it's the other way around. And I guess the flexible working, where I've experienced or I've been aware of, is it works well that they can drop their kids off at school and do little errands and stuff. And it helps the holistic sort of well-being. But you're saying now that because women, and I certainly intensify this, tend to do more outside the sort of rest times, I guess, offline, and continue to keep going, which effectively means they're burning out. That's the issue here, is it?
Yeah, burnout is the issue. You also find that women, once they've done their work, or if something has gone over and above, so for instance, if you've taken the children to school, picked them up for school, and there's been something else that's delayed your journey, or something's just happened in life, so you've dipped into an hour, you'll find that women will more often than men go back to their computers in the evening and work, rather than a male. A male will sit and probably do the odd email via his telephone, but a woman will actually go back into the environment for 2 or 3 hours of an evening because there's a sense of guilt there. And all of these have come from studies. It's not just me saying that.
So if that's sort of what we're getting in terms of studies, that women are burning out, there's sort of an issue with the sort of equality of it all. As employers who have a duty of care with their employees, how might they help and assist and facilitate their staff not to, I guess, do that? Or what are sort of things we can sort of build into the models or the practices of working at home and flexible working?
If done well, it is a very, very good form of work, a absolutely brilliant model of working. But there's things that we can do to make life better for all. And it's about having an exclusive society, isn't it? It's about being inclusive and collaborative thinking, and making sure that all of those ideas that people have are collective, but they're written down, so they become a policy, they become a process, and that people work with them. So many people write policies out there, And there's so many business owners who don't actually know what's in their policies, which I find absolutely very, very scary. But to have a hybrid working policy is critical now. And even more so than that, I think one of the scariest statistics I've come across so far on the hybrid model is 92% of businesses still do not have an exclusive pay structure policy for hybrid workers. When you know that the hybrid working model is growing extensively, that in itself, when you've done all this hard work on trying to get pay structures to be equal, is astonishing to me. So it's about policy, about process, making sure that everybody is inclusive. So because there's more study out there that if you're on a Zoom call or a meeting on virtually, then women more often than not do not feel that they have a fair voice. So it's making sure you're regularly contacting all of those people at hybrid working. Okay. And before you even put them into play, to make sure that you've got your contracts of employment that include that. You've looked at your business insurances, because not all business insurance will cover hybrid working. And also, if you're rented a property, you've got to actually check with your landlord that you can work from home. And a lot of people won't know that either. So once you've got the person in the hybrid space, make sure you've got the policies and make sure you've done your risk assessments. I think this has been the biggest problem that I've come across, and the biggest challenge for all. It's been very, very good and absolutely great flexibly that we might have our business in Hampshire and then we employ someone hybrid in, say, Edinburgh. But then what happens about the risk assessment? How do you know that they're sitting correctly at the right height? How do you know they're only doing their so many hours a day? And how do you know their equipment is safe? There are so many parameters that have got to be considered, which are being lost in the ether. Let's put it that way.
So not going into policies as such, because I don't want us to get into all that and in terms of right, but in terms of, going to the example of the sort of women who are potentially at a burnout because they're doing all this work and just filling everything with work and other activities that are not helping them have a break. How can we, besides just saying it's in the policy, you must do it, and we know that that's not, there's more than that. How can we sort of create, I suppose, a culture and environment that prevents that, really? What have you observed? What have you noticed? What is your experience of some organizations you've worked with that have said they've embraced the hybrid working model and doing it in a really good way, and just be understanding what some of the things they've done to help embrace that, besides just writing the policies? And it's more than that, isn't it?
It's much more than that. Yeah, they've been actively involved. So what they do is I work very much, because of what I do, on the PDCA model, which is Plan, Do, Check, Act. And the companies that are doing it right are the ones who are regularly monitoring those people who are working in the hybrid workplace. So they're regularly speaking to them. They've even made a conscious effort of perhaps once a month or once a quarter going out to them, rather than the person being expected to come to the office. There has to be a two-way street here. So they've gone out to the employee, they've checked their equipment, they've checked their working space, they're not still cross-legged on the sofa, and all those sort of things, because you'll get into the realms of claims of employees causing long-term stress, anxiety, backache, neck ache. So the regular monitoring of the person, and just literally off pat ringing them up, off pat speaking to them virtually, not always have a constructed, we're going to meet at 11 o'clock, because we're human beings. If we know we've got a meeting at 11 o'clock, we plan it, we're there, we're ready, we're conscious. But sometimes if you ring someone up, or you just automatically put out a Zoom and say, oh, we're going to meet in 10 minutes, people won't be ready. They won't be planned. And then you see people for their reality, their real selves. So you'll see whether they're stressed out, that you'll see if they haven't been organized, all of those things. And employers that do it right are proactive in their approach. They will have a plan, and then they will have another plan just in case that plan doesn't work. So always have a plan B. And then they become an inclusive culture. An inclusive culture will produce and increase that equality too. And it doesn't matter where we are or how we work or what we're doing. Hybrid isn't for everyone, but if it works for your business, it has to be done right. Because otherwise, you have a duty as an employer, your employees will be unhappy and they will leave. And the whole model is about having a flexible, sustainable, and safe environment to work in.
Yeah, and how do we balance that? It's interesting that going to people's homes, and I think there's some merit in that. But how do we balance that interaction, engagement, but also privacy? Because obviously our home is our home, isn't it? The sense of privacy. And I know a lot happened in COVID that people became a lot more aware of people's lifestyles and their children, and in some way there's some real positive stuff came of that. I didn't realize you had 2 children because they were running around behind you. How do we balance the privacy bits of your own home, but also that trying to be helpful and engaging and everything else? It's a tricky one, isn't it?
Very tricky. And this is where it's down to the employer and management teams to actually decide whether that person fits the hybrid model, whether that working role fits the hybrid model. Because it's square peg round hole, isn't it? I mean, it has to fit the purpose of the job. It has to fit the job role. It has to fit the person who's going to be doing that job role. And like I said, it's not for all industries. It's very, very rare to have manufacturing or construction hybrid workers because it just doesn't fit. But a lot of people in administrative roles, which are actually critical to every business, they're the ones who are at home. They're the ones who are hybrid working. And more often than not, they are women. You do, obviously, men are also in that environment too. But everyone, if they're not careful, no matter where they're working, will have burnout. Everyone has forms of and places of isolation. But when it comes to the privacy of your home, as long as you have placed put a plan in place, you've got your organization that you know what the expectations are of the organization as well as of that person who's doing that job role. It's about matching. Yeah, and that's where recruitment has to be right as well. So many times we recruit people and they don't fit the role. That's down to a recruitment process. So that's where it all starts with matching the right person for the job role and whether that job role fits the hybrid model.
Yeah, no, and I think it's important to, as things start to evolve, to understand that in terms of how we recruit, who recruits, is a role valid as a hybrid position as well, and then maintaining that sort of, I guess, thinking always in terms of moving it forward. And just looking to the future, what's your view how things are going to start to evolve with the hybrid working? How do you see it going? Anything you think be more aware of as things start to unfold in the next sort of 12, 18 months?
I think that it's definitely not going to be going away. It has become a norm. I don't like that word very much, but that just seems to be part of the way we're working. There are pros and cons in both. You've got the fact that it's going to rise. If the energy crisis is going to continue, then employers will find different ways of working, and sometimes it's cheaper for them to have people working from home. You've also got other industries and other things that happen. I'll give you a story. I met at an event just lately, a lady who was a lawyer from London, and she was forced, as a lot of us were in the pandemic, to work from home, and she suffered burnout. So now she's decided that she's going to go back to the office all full time. And I think there will be an element of people who, because they were forced into it, they haven't adapted well. They've come back out the other side and they've said, well, actually, do you know what? I'm not sure if my employees are going to do their structured working day comprehensively or well. But that's also down to the monitoring again. It all goes down to monitoring and making sure that the person who's going to be in the hybrid model is working productively and safe.
Just on that monitoring, it's an interesting approach. Monitoring, isn't it? Suddenly, monitoring means I'm being watched, I'm being checked if I'm doing my work, and you're talking more about monitoring there. Are they doing too much and more the burnout? But there's a flip side, isn't there, where people have the little green dots on the various apps that tell you you're actually actively working on your PC. And if you go away for more than 5 minutes, it turns whatever, amber, red, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Which people can say, oh, they're not, what are they doing? And obviously sometimes it's good to step away and do stuff, write things down, think things through. You don't have to be on a laptop all the time. How can we have a healthy approach to monitoring? Because I feel sometimes when people do work in a home position, they feel this sense of guilt. They have to be working all the time. And we know in reality, when you're in the office, you'll obviously do your work, but you'll get up, go make a cup of tea, go and chat to someone, and suddenly you 15 minutes have gone. You've been away from your and somebody says, oh, where's so-and-so? Oh, they're just making a cup of tea and they got chatting to somebody else. And that's normal, very normal. Yeah. But if you're at home, got up to have a cup of tea and start chatting to your neighbor or your wife, your husband, whatever, you feel guilty about that and think, oh, no, I've got to go back. So how do we create a healthier culture with that whole monitoring mindset?
Well, for every hour, really, when you're in front of a computer, whether that be a laptop or a fixed computer, every hour you should really come away every 5 minutes. That is health and safety guidance. So that's one. Number two, on the monitoring of people at home, I personally think that there are so many lovely pieces of software out there that we can monitor people actively working at their computers. You've just mentioned one with the RAG system. I think a lot of it is about education and training, and also there is a massive element of trust when you are in the hybrid model and you're working at home, and it's about people's well-being. So I think the well-being factors have to be looked at far more than they would if you saw someone coming in the office. They're still there, they're still apparent. But when you're physically seeing someone working and they're in the office all day, it's very different to when they're sitting at home, they're on virtually, they may be on for 20 minutes or an hour, and then you don't see them the rest of the day. It really does depend on your industry and on the person. And that's why that match is so incredibly important to get right. It really is.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I guess I suppose it's trying to think of, and I've talked to a lot of companies where they focus more on the results that the individual does rather than what they're doing, if you know what I mean. It's the output or the result of what their outputs, and therefore whether they are monitoring their online all the time or not, if they're getting the results they're supposed to get in the way they want to get them, that's all they're interested in. And I think there's far more, in terms of a management point of view, a better way of approaching. Then you don't feel you have to be glued to your laptop and just looking at a laptop permanently. Because I know, using an office context, you are wandering around a lot more as well, which I think is better for you. I mean, I'm like you. I quite regularly will wander around for 5-10 minutes just to stretch my legs and look out the window and just good for my well-being, rather than just staring at a screen all day long. So I think it's an interesting thing as things evolve and the whole sort of hybrid, and I'm sure we'll learn. But is there any other sort of just before we finish, any other sort of advice or tips that you've observed in terms of making sure that hybrid can really work well for an organization?
Planning. It all comes down, I would have said, to the planning. And right from the offset, before you've even employed that person, make sure that you've really investigated the hybrid working and then it fits that job role. Because you've then got to fit the person to that job role. And once you've done that, you've then got to make sure you've done your monitoring and that they're happy while they're doing it. And you'll find that a lot of people who go for a hybrid working job that say 3 days in the office, 2 days at home, or vice versa, are better off with the mixed hybrid, the flexible hybrid, and they're better off from a work-life balance point of view. But where it has its higher risk is when it's full hybrid. So going forward, I would have said the biggest benefit is to make sure it's always mixed, always have a plan, make sure everyone is happy on the onset before you even go down the road of actually throwing that person into that work, and then constantly review it.
Yeah, and I think it's trying to, I've got I worked with a client who were remote first, which is, I guess, everything was remote, and then they would meet and with the client, sometimes in person, sometimes online, but they would create moments quite regularly to connect in person, in terms of co-working spaces. And I think that's really important as well, to try and sort of mimic some of that interaction that you would get in an office environment, because that's where a lot of the nuances you don't get quite on an online meeting, but you get in the office context or in-person context. I think that's really important as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, and you and I met through networking. I mean, that's a fine example, isn't it? Of bringing everyone together. Outside all of this, do your away days. There's another great one. And the other one I will say is, do a virtual quiz night or something like that outside the constructive working day, and make sure everyone is included. Give everybody the same opportunities and the same choices.
Yeah, no, that's important. I think that's another conversation, another time, but that whole making sure that somebody who's in the office more doesn't get the more impact or influence versus somebody who is not in the office as much, depending on their roles.
Everyone has to remain visible throughout.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you for your insights, Sarah Jane. Thank you for sharing that. If people want to connect with you and get in touch with you, what's the best way of doing that?
LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn or on my website, which is www.sbbusinesssupport.co.uk. And if they do it by email, it's sarah@sbbusinesssupport.com. Always 3 S's in it, because people aren't great with spelling.
Well, thank you for your time.
No, thank you too.